Hello and welcome to Lone Star Silver Screen, a podcast about everything that exists at the intersection of Texas and the movies. I'm your host, Austin Zook, and today I'm joined by filmmaker Austin Sayre, another Austin on the podcast, and we are going to be talking about his new film, The Man with the Big Hat. Austin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you. So, to kick things off, for someone who is not familiar with this film, can you give me like a 30-second rundown of what they should expect watching this movie?
Yeah, it's just be prepared, to be emotionally attached to someone that you most likely have never heard of before. That's what happened to me. I got drawn in by Steve Fromholz and what he did mostly outside of music. And, I found myself after screenings talking to people who came into the screenings totally blind and they were in tears because they were so attached to the way that he lived his life and the way that he obviously affected these people. So yeah, it's an emotional, intimate journey into someone whose story was much larger than music.
So let's zoom out for a second. If somebody's listening and they have no idea who Steven Fromholz is, how would you describe him? I mean, what was he to music?
He was one of the, what do you say, like leading people behind, what is the Austin, they call it like the Austin sound, that was created in the early to mid 70s with like, it was Steve and Jerry Jeff, and there was Willie, like Kinky Friedman and Asleep at the Wheel. But he was just one of the early architects. He was like one of the first people that came to town with a record deal because he came to Austin. He had played in the late 60s, and then he came back in 74, but he was one of the only people that actually came with a record deal. And then Asleep at the Wheel came, and then Willie came shortly after. But yeah, I mean, he's just one of the names that seems to have just continually fallen through the cracks of time, which is unfortunate because when you ask any of these musicians, like, who is the best natural entertainer and performer, Steve is always the number one person that they say, just because he had so much fun on stage and just his relationships and interactions with his audience was second to none. Like nobody could compete with Steve on stage.
Now, you talk about this a little bit in the documentary, but how did you originally come across Steve's work?
His first album, which was a duo with Dan McCrimmon, who lives in Colorado, and it's an album called Frumix. So Frumix came from Fromholz's last name, and then the word Lummox, which is kind of like this clumsy person, which Fromholz was not. So it was just kind of a play on words. But I found that record shortly after moving to Texas in an antique mall, I think. I think that's where I found it. And I was just drawn to the cover. And it was everything I love about, photography, film, record covers, and it's just this guy that's looking off into the distance, just the palette, just this kind of warm, muted Kodak palette that I love. And I picked it up not knowing anything about it and took it home, stewed on it. It took me some time to really dive into who Steve was, but it started this thing. I wanted to know more about him. And I had started collecting records in Austin about lesser known musicians and their first albums. So I started this series with that record in mind. And when it came time to start learning about Steven, I would find these little pieces that had, that were just like these little nuggets that I just kept learning. And my wife would come home like, I had no idea this guy did this. I learned this today, records that he made that never came out. And so that kind of started my journey into Steven. And she looked at me one day and was just like, there's a lot to this man. There's a movie here that should be made about this guy. So it was just kind of that. And we just both jumped in with both feet and never having made a film before, and that's just kind of where it started was that Frumix record.
So I think you said when you initially reached out to me to tell me a little bit about this project that you spent 6 years on it. So as someone who has never made a film before and you're jumping into this and it takes 6 years, how do you maintain motivation throughout that entire process?
It's tough. It's
Yeah.
tough. It's just, the number one thing I told myself in making this film was, when I were looking for people who knew Steven, like reoccurring characters on liner notes and video performances and all that stuff, is like, I'm not coming in to just get a story or you know, a soundbite about Steve. Like I'm investing my time in all of these people and his family. And so the relationships meant so much to me. So throughout those 6 years, 7 years, the relationships is the main thread through this. And that's the most important thing to me is just like, go to Steve's daughter's house and wives' house for, annual monthly lunches and dinners and stuff like that. And just going and hanging out with all these people and going to all their shows, and then just continuing to dig into all of the archives like at North Texas and the family's archive. So that was like during COVID, that's what I had to do. We couldn't film or anything like that. So what I did, I just dug into the archives, went up to North Texas for a handful of days and just scanned stuff. So it's just, there's always stuff to find, but
Well, so whenever you are doing this digging and you're working through the family's archives and the archives in North Texas, was there anything in particular that you stumbled upon that got you really excited about that you remember?
yeah, the one of the main reasons why I even wanted to make the movie, besides the Fromix record, was Fromholz in 1973 made a record with Michael Nesmith of the Monkees, and Nesmith had the subsidiary label of Elektra Records in the early 70s, and he wanted it because Nesmith is from Texas, and he had met Steve in the 60s when Steve was out in California in the Navy, and so they'd known each other. And when Michael started this label called Countryside, he had like 4 or 5 artists that were on it, and Steve was one of them. So Nesmith flew out to Denver, hung out with Steve, brought Steve onto the label, and then flew Steve out to California and basically had Michael Nesmith's band record an album. And the album was called How Long is the Road to Kentucky? And the album was made, and 2 days before it was to be actually pressed, the record, Elektra Records power at the top, David Geffen, was kicked out, or Jack Holtzman, who started Elektra, was kicked out. David Geffen came in, and then that label was dropped, and so the record never got made. So there's always been like this, where is this record? So on this long hunt to find this record, find the master tapes, and we located them. So we have the master tapes, and it kind of has this big cult following. It's like, where are the tapes? Like we always heard about it, and Steve talked about it, and so we have it. So that's been the big dream of mine, is to finding the right label to actually bring that album back to life. Because I know the guy who has the one test pressing of it, and that was Steve's former classmate, who's also an archivist. But yeah, that. How Long is the Road to Kentucky is the main like nugget that really drew me in, because I have to find this. I know it exists.
That's so cool that you came across that. Who was the hardest person to get involved in the documentary?
I don't know. I mean, nobody really. Did we want Willie? Yeah, like it's Willie. He's very insulated, and rightfully so. And we've talked to everybody in Willie's circle: his manager, his wife, his daughters. But it was just we couldn't get to him. But no, everybody was just like reaching out to me. Like Lyle Levitt messaged me out of the blue and was like, "I'd love to be in this film about Steven, because he meant so much to me, and I want to be able to give back. Is there room for me in the movie?" And I'm just like, yeah, there's absolutely
We
room
can
for
fit
you.
you in.
We could fit you in, Lyle. And so that was the coolest thing, and Lyle has just been like one of our biggest champions, and he's helping arrange screenings with people he knows. And so there's another screening coming to Texas that we're super excited about. But yeah, I mean, nobody. It was just like, how can I help? Yeah, nothing. Nobody was hard. It was just the traveling was the hardest part, because we went everywhere. We went down to Big Bend. Our first shoot, I had just broken my pelvis, so I was in a wheelchair. But no, everybody was more than willing and very, very easy.
Well, I have to ask, how did you break your pelvis?
At my dad's house in Kansas City, he had an acre-sized pond, and he built a zip line over top of it. And I got up about 20 feet on the platform, and my seating and situation, no harness or anything. My seating situation, my handles and my seat kind of went 2 different ways, and I just went as far as I could, and then fell. Yeah. And then 4 weeks, and then we had just booked our very first shoot for the film in Terlingua in Big Bend, and that was the first thing I thought of. Was just like, what am I going to do? I can't walk. Like, I'm bedridden for 8 weeks, 12 weeks. But we did it. We went down there. I did it in a wheelchair and walker, and got on the river and my walker and all that stuff. So it was a ton of fun.
That's awesome that you still made it through, because I'm guessing that was pretty painful. And
I mean, it wasn't like, yeah, I mean, it wasn't as painful. I mean, like initially it was painful, but
yeah.
yeah.
So one of the things about Fromholz is he's kind of like one of these guys who's your favorite musician's favorite musician, and you have a lot of people, like we've already mentioned in the documentary, talking about how much he meant to them and their art. What is it about him that you think people responded to so strongly?
His honesty, just the way that, I mean, he was the same person off stage that he was on stage. The way that Lyle talks about him, Lyle would open for Steve and Steve would hang around, before and after. They'd shoot pool beforehand and then they'd talk about songwriting before and after, and that was Steve was one of the people when Lyle was coming up at A&M. When Lyle was a journalism major, he would interview his favorite musicians, and Steve was one of them. And that's, like why Lyle wanted to pay it forward was because of how much Steve gave back. And Steve's song Bears was like the big inspiration for Lyle's If I Had a Pony. It was just like, wow, this guy can write this song about bears and have so much more meaning than like what you think it sounds like on the first listen through, then that influenced heavily like Lyle's songwriting for Having a Pony on a Boat, but yeah, just his honesty and his ability to just connect with the crowd and make them feel like they were the only one in the room and that Steve was talking to them, and the way that his life, his personal experiences were translatable to anybody. He didn't have to be in Texas. He could be anywhere. But his songwriting ability was just able to translate into other people's life experiences.
So if somebody wanted to dip a toe into Steve Fromholz's discography, are there 2 or 3 songs you would recommend they start out with?
Yeah, I mean, I'd Have to Be Crazy is, of course, the number one. It's the song that Steve, if that song didn't get recorded by Willie, then, I wouldn't be making this movie, wouldn't have made this movie. But yeah, I'd Have to Be Crazy, The Man with the Big Hat, and I mean, I guess Texas Trilogy, those are the 3, and they're all things that they're all true things. They're all inspired by true events that Steven was in. Man in the Big Hat was an old hard rock miner that Steve met. Texas Trilogy is about Steve's life growing up in Copperell, Texas, and I'd Have to Be Crazy is about his wife that he was with at the time. He wrote it in a little cabin in Colorado. But yeah, those are the 3. Those are the 3.
Well, and I think that's something that comes up during the documentary is how personal his songwriting is and how he was showing some of these other musicians that if you make something that is deeply rooted in a specific place and it's deeply personal, that in a weird way kind of makes it universal and makes it appealing to everyone. And that seems like it was almost his superpower.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to just about any of his songs, I mean, it's just like that experience can only happen to one person. It's a very uniquely experience that only Steve could experience, but somehow he was able to put it into words to make us feel like, hey, that's happened to me before. I know what he's feeling or what he's trying to say, or I've stood at that same place and felt those same feelings. Yeah, that was just for a guy that, yeah, I mean, that was his superpower.
One of the things the documentary does that I think is really cool is that within the doc, you almost have like a mini documentary about the Austin, Texas music scene from like 74 to 76. I mean, what was it like for you kind of digging into those stories and figuring out what the scene felt like at that time? I think one of my favorite quotes is a guy says, for those 3 years, you could actually make a living as a musician in Austin.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard, because there's so much footage and there's so many musicians and there's so many things to cover, and it's just like, what do you put in? What do you leave out? And so we just kind of had to dip our toe in it and just give this little glimpse of like the magic that was Austin in that time period. Yeah, I mean, it was just a very magical moment that was just this lightning in a bottle that Austin was the center of the universe, and like Bobby Bridger says it was like Paris in the 20s. It was just this little, Austin's always been that way. This little artistic, creative, oasis.
You live in Austin today. I mean, do you feel like that spirit is still alive and well there?
You have to search for it. You have to search
Yeah.
for it, but it's definitely there. I mean, that's what initially drew me to Austin when we moved here 15 years ago, was just that it's the tech, and not just Austin, but the Texas, just like live and let live kind of mindset. But, that was the first thing that hit me, was just like, oh, I can be anybody that I want to be here, and I think that's why Steve stayed, was because, when he had his second daughter Felicity in 1980, he made that decision then. He was like, I'm done touring. I want to be a dad, and I could carve out a career for myself here in Austin. And that's what he did. He became an actor on the, stage and screen, became a river guide for 25, 30 years. And Austin was his home base because his hometown supported him. He was very much a part of his community. And there are a handful of musicians that still do those things, just like Steve and like Butch and Jimmy Dale and all them did. There are a handful of musicians that are kind of still continuing to carry that torch, and that responsibility of, representing your community in other ways than just music.
So you mentioned earlier that your wife was pretty involved in helping you get started on this project. I mean, talk to me a little bit more about the role she played in getting this over the finish line.
Without crying, no, I mean, she's just been supported me from day one. It's just like she saw me at it was I didn't think it could happen, and it's just like one foot in front of the other, like things will happen, things will work out. And she was the one who just kept pushing me, kept telling me, no, just like, there's a story here and you are making it in your own way. And so her support and letting me figure this out, and then her guidance, when we were trying to put the story together, was just just extremely important. I relied on her and her input for everything. We had an editor, Nevi, and she was amazing, and then but Steph, like for our editing notes, like throughout the entire editing process that took like 2 years. Steph, I go back to my editor. Well, I think Steph said this. Steph felt this way, and so it was just like her input was more so, like it was a very 50-50 partnership on crafting this story.
So I wanted to talk about the editing because I think the movie does a really good job of not only taking all of this footage of Fromholz on stage performing, talking through his songs from different points in his career, but it balances that really well with the talking head stuff that you have from all the interviews you've conducted. What did it take to find that balance? I mean, how did you balance kind of the footage of just Steve performing and telling his own stories with the interviews you conducted?
Yeah, yeah, I had a movie in my head before we started this, and it was nothing the way that it turned out to be. I wanted it to be this verite type film, because that's what our first shoot was. We went down to Terlingua, filmed this whole ceremony, and I'm like, this is great. This is what our movie's going to be. It's going to be this just nobody sitting down, no talking heads. We're just going to walk and talk and just be in everybody's environment and atmosphere this whole time. It's going to be great. And then I had to decide, am I going to be in it? No, I don't really want to be in it. And then the interviews, once we started with the interviews, it was important for me to capture not only their stories, but their environment of each person. So like if you had the TV on mute or the screen on mute, then you kind of got an idea of who was in front of you. You can kind of put the picture together in your head on like what they were saying and what they were about. But yeah, so it just kind of turned into having a couple of talking heads, but like there was so much archival footage that it could be made without talking heads. We could have done a movie without, it was just audio. So it was a delicate dance, because I know my editor, Nevi, she worked on the Richard Linklater doc, and she said, I thought Richard saved everything, but Steve like puts him to shame. Like this is like his wife Janie, like she saved everything, so it was important to me to bring Steve's voice out, to make it as tangible as possible with his letters and with these photos, because that's what I wanted to. It was so important to me to just like have Steve as present as possible throughout the entire duration of the film. Yeah, and it's just that balance of like just bringing you into Janie's living room or putting you on the river with these people, because I wanted you to see what Steve saw and why he loved it, and like why, that sitting in that living room, like Steven spent every night in that living room on the raft on the Rio Grande, just like to see the things that Steve saw and what he fell in love with and why he wrote about those things. So I mean, it was tough to go back and forth, but in the end, I think it worked out well.
Well, I wanted to ask you about some of your influences. I mean, who are the filmmakers or what are the films that you are taking inspiration from when you're going through this process?
I mean, any Les Blanc film, those like Mance Lipscomb films. Yeah, I try to watch all the music docs that I could, like the Karen Dalton doc. I love that. There was a film called Sam Now, which is a really great doc about this kid whose mom just kind of up and leaves and disappears, and they kind of like go on this kind of like journey to find his mom, but it was edited very well together with like archival footage. Yeah, just trying to find like I watched a lot of music docs, and I was just like, I don't want my film to be like that. I don't want it to be like that. I kind of want it to be like this. I knew that our film was going to be very archival heavy, but I also wanted it to breathe with the elements. So it was trying to find those more pastoral films, like, I mean, like there's big films like Days of Heaven, yeah, but like, not like Days of Heaven, but but like those types of sunlight and lighting and stuff like that. Like our interview with Butch Hancock and stuff like that is very kind of has that sort of feel. But yeah, I mean the Karen Dalton doc and stuff like that.
So before we get to plugs and what's next for the film,
Sure.
Austin, I
Yeah.
finish every episode of this show by asking my guest, what's something you love about Texas?
I mean, I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, is that you have the freedom to, for me, you have the freedom to be whoever you want to be. And growing up in Indiana, you're just this art kid who gets like singled out and being like this weirdo kid and told that you get made fun of when you say you want to make a movie. And then you move to Texas and you get embraced by the music community, the film community, and then just like people get behind you. And yeah, it's just the freedom to find your own path.
Love that. So the movie right now, you've had some screenings, you're taking it around. What's next? When are people going to be able to watch this?
That is up in the air right now. We had talks with a distributor on Monday who's helping us find a home for the film. It's just it's not a matter of when, it's just who is the right home. Because I have people asking all the time, where can we see it? I'm looking for it on Prime. I'm just like, don't work that way. But yeah, we have a screening at the Flyover Festival in Louisville on July 31st, and then we're working for a screening at the Cliff Decks in Clifton. So they reached out to me yesterday, so we'll do a screening there. But yeah, that's it for right now. I'm just it's been a weird summer for festivals. In
Yeah.
movies in general, horror seems to be doing really well right now, and it's so tough for a niche film like ours with a lesser known name that we're trying to get out to the world.
Couldn't agree more. And I recognized a couple of songs once the doc got going, but I was nowhere near an expert or very familiar even with Fromholz's work. And I mean, he's incredible. And this is a really fantastic documentary. You should be really proud of it. And
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to seeing it find its audience. Right now, if people want to just keep up with your progress, is there an Instagram page they can go to?
Yeah, we have a Facebook group and we have Instagram. It's the Man with the Big Hat Film on both, and then the film has its own website, themanwiththebighatfilm.com. And so I update on Instagram and Facebook most frequently. There's nothing really to update on the website as much, but yeah, the tickets for the Louisville screening are up now, which is the 31st. But yeah, those are the 3 places.
Okay. Well, if you're listening to this right now, I am going to include links to all of the social media pages in the episode description. So check that out, follow the film, keep up with its progress. Austin, last thing before I let you go, what's the next film going to be?
No, I don't know if it could be music.
Yeah.
Not music. Not music. There's something about my high school that has the town seems to have this like black cloud curse over top of it. So it's a very weird kind of true crime sort of thing that has happened with my high school town. It's a very, very unique story. Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to see what
Yeah.
that turns into.
Yeah.
All right, man. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was great. And
Yeah, thank you so much.
congrats again on finishing the film.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed the show, please remember to rate, review, and follow us wherever it is you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at Lone Star Film Pod. We'll be back soon with another new episode, but in the meantime, we'll see you at the movies and on the dusty trails of Texas. Bye.